Good morning. Give me 1 second. I meant to do this before I went live. There we go. Good morning, everybody. Let me make sure both platforms are actually up. There is YouTube. Looks good. And there is Facebook. Excellent. All right. Good morning. My name is Samantha Mirabal with Melco's application team. Oops. My cord is in the way. There we go. All right. And we're doing our DesignShop talk today to see what questions you might have to try to get them answered. Good morning, Diane. Thank you for joining. So if you have questions while we're live, please type them in the chat. Don't send them privately. I do not see those until much later. Just on a logistical side, we've got this week and next week, and then the first 3 weeks in June, we're not going to have any DesignShop talk. So this week and next week, and then we'll be off for 3 weeks, and then I'll be back at the very end of June. So that's just kind of a ahead planning. Good morning, Sherry. Thanks for joining. All right, so I'm going to start off with the questions that I have to begin with. If you have questions while live, just type them in. So let's see. I'm getting ready to start some custom patches. Any advice? Okay, so patches are a lot of fun, and you'll find there are a whole bunch of ways to do them. Fundamentally, you kind of have, let's just talk 2 ways to do them, right? So I can pre-cut some shapes. So I can cut a bunch of circles or a bunch of squares or die cut, whatever it is. I can pre-cut stuff, a fabric, and then I can put it in the hoop and sew on it. All right, so that's one way. You can hoop some basic material and just embroider the daylights out of it. Okay, so it's kind of just a straight embroidery. That's another. You can also hoop, like sew in some fabric, cut it out in the hoop, and then sew a border on it. There's another. Or you can sew it all just on fabric and then hot knife it all. All of those are just different techniques. They all produce patches. They're all pretty. It's a personal preference. I do a ton of patches that I always hoop kind of like a plastic. So you can use Badge Master, which is a product. You can use the cut and wash. It's like a Vilene is the generic name for it, but cut and wash works well, which are dissolvable with water stabilizers, so they go away. I prefer to use like a 6mm plastic. You can also find, the stuff that covers in diners, the clear plastic that they put over top the tables, just to make it easier to clean. So that vinyl you can find at Joann's or at marinevinyl.com, places like that. A really heavyweight vinyl. You can also sew patches on that. All right. All of that said, let's just talk about how we digitize them, right? So as far as methods, we have some links on patches. There's a PDF in there where Melco shows how you can embroider something, unhoop it, cut it out. So now you've got the embroidered patch, and then you rehoop and just do the border. Okay, so that's one technique. So it's basically 2 hoopings, but one you sew it all nice and clean and then put a border on it. Okay, so that's one way you can deal with it. But digitizing, how I prefer to do it is like this. So you draw whatever shape it is. I'm just doing a circle, and that's a walk normal, and it's a placement. So what you would do is you would take your hoop, this thing, you would hoop some plastic or Badge Master, whatever you're going to use, right? So, and this is going to cut it in the hoop type method, all right? So I hoop that plastic. I'm going to run this stitch. So I hoop it, put it in the machine, no fabric, just sew a circle. All right, what is that? That's a placement stitch for where it's going to go. So then I can grab my fabric, which I'm just going to draw a fabric like this, pretend like it's a, all right, so I just drew a vector, but okay, so then you take your fabric and you lay it over top that. Do you need one this big? No, but right, so you're going to lay it on top of that. Tools of the trade, don't put your fingers in here, right, when it goes to sew again. Because sewing through fingers is bad. So use a chopstick if you want to hold things while it's running. There's these smudgers, which they're plastic. You can get them on Amazon. They're for installing electronic components. They're called smudgers. Those work really well as for going in there, because if you sew over a piece of plastic or wood, a chopstick, you're going to break a needle, but you're not going to end up with stitches. So safer that way. All right, so my first step was this. I lay down my fabric. My second step is going to be resewing that. All right. So you sew it, you stop the machine, you put the fabric down, you sew it again. What do I have? A big old square sewn to my hoop. That's cool. But that's not what I want, right? So then I'm going to grab my scissors, or this is kind of my favorite tool right here. And notice, I don't know if you can even see it. You can kind of see it. So that's a seam ripper. I broke off the point of it because I'll take the ball end of the seam and lay it along the fabric and push it around using the razor to cut the fabric. So that stops me from cutting the plastic in the hoop while getting it really close to the edge and gets a nice clean. So that's what I tend to use a lot of. You can use regular like curved scissors and things like that. But overall, you're going to take this thing, you're going to cut it out. So what does that leave you with? That leaves me with, that leaves me with this. A piece of fabric sewn down in the hoop. Okay. Cut relatively close to that circle. All right. So the very next thing to do would be to then make sure it's secure, right? So I'm going to copy that, paste that, and good morning, Colleen. So I'm going to convert this walk stitch over into a tackle stitch. You can do that two ways. I can click on this change element type and tell it to be a single line, add, and then change that over to a tackle. And then I probably want that tackle stitch to be a little wider. So let's say 30 points. Okay. So that's just so I get it nice and secure. So now whatever decoration you're going to do, your patch design, now you have fun. Sew away. So, you know, whatever text you want, whatever pretty design, whatever logo, any of that fun stuff, you're going to put on it here. So design. All right, so we sew our design. All right, whatever that might be. All right, so I've got a placement, a tack down, the tackle stitch to hold it still. I sew my design, and the very last thing we need is our satin stitch. So I copied that circle, pasted it, and moved it after my design, and now I'm going to change it back to a satin and make that 40 points. There. So this will penetrate, like stab the plastic or your badge master enough so that the design just pops out. All right, so that's why we do it last and not before, because if you do it before, it can get weak and rip apart while you're trying to do the design. All right, so that's kind of the overall process for it. Now, if you're, let's say you want to hot knife it, you don't like cutting things out, you just want to hoop and go. That's cool. You can use the same file, right? But instead of cutting this out into plastic, I can hoop anything synthetic, right? So I can hoop a synthetic stabilizer and the fabric all it together, hoop it, sew the entire design. So without these applique stops. And when it's done, I go get my hot knife and I cut close to this, and it will cut and seal the fabric and the backing all at once. Okay, so that's kind of using a hot knife. That works with anything synthetic. What materials can you use? Polyesters, the poly twills, most of the backings are synthetic. So if it's cotton, cotton won't seal with a hot knife. So it's got to be a synthetic material that melts. All right, and what hot knife? I use a soldering iron with a blade on it. I will say I don't do a lot of those type personally because I have a mild tremor and my hand can't do it. So doesn't stop me from being able to embroider and cut, but when I try to cut really close to this with a hot knife, I get very frustrated. So that's just me personally. What are some other ways we can do our patches? If we pre-cut it. Okay, so let's say we pre-cut this shape. So what steps do we need for that? Well, for a pre-cut shape, I don't need a placement and a tack down. All I need is a placement. I can delete that stitch because I'm going to sew a circle to show me where it belongs. Then I'm going to grab my pre-cut shape, use a spray adhesive or a glue stick or something to secure it down to the plastic here inside that circle. So you'll take your fabric, glue it down, and then you go straight into your tackle stitch to hold it still. Again, be smart. Use something to poke at it, not your finger. Okay. Then you do your design and your satin stitch and you're done. So there's a bunch of different techniques. They all work. Let's say if you want to do what Melko suggests, one of the other ideas Melco has is you sew them out ahead of time. You can sew a bunch of designs, cut them all out, and then just do a bunch of borders. All right. Don't forget, you also have the ability to do the faux marrow borders, which are kind of fun. So those shift. So if I draw a circle, change that to decorative, change that to faux patch border. That's the wrong way, so I'm going to use the other one. There we go. So that does like a faux marrow stitch. Okay, so you don't have to do a satin stitch. You could do a faux marrow stitch. It's again, personal preference. What do you want your patch to look like? Remember, marrow stitch is typically done with the marrow machine. So it's done outside of embroidery. So if you're going to do that, again, that's cool. Sew the entire design, take your fabric over the marrow machine, sew on a border, and you're done. So there's a lot of ways we can attack patches. I believe we got you a link to some articles, which include a bunch of different videos and whatnot. Kind of showed you the basics of digitizing, you know, whatever shape you want. I did a circle because it's quick and easy, but you can do whatever you want for it. Okay. Hopefully that helps a little. Let's see, what else do we have? I have DesignShop Pro Plus, Package C. That's a Bravo thing, which doesn't really matter about Pro Plus. That applies to your machine itself. You're having trouble with your Ethernet connection. What I would recommend is getting in touch with a service department. They can help you. I find most of the time the Ethernet connection stuff ends up being either the adapter not set right in the OS, or something with the firewall or virus software, or something is blocking it on Windows side. So I usually bang around until I figure it out. But rather than doing that, you can contact service and they can help you out usually really fast. All right. But compatible with 11, yes, we have there's a compatibility document that you can check out on the FAQ site. So if you are curious about what version of software is compatible with different versions of Windows, there is a document out there in the FAQ that will help you with that. We did get you a link in the comments on how to get in touch with technical support. So I highly recommend. They're fantastic, and I think they've got a really high closure rate of getting people straightened out. So let's see, embossed letters with foam, tips for digitizing and sewing. Okay, so this one, just in case you're not familiar with what that looks like, it's this sort of thing where you are doing foam underneath to kind of push up the fabric. Okay, so there's a bunch of different looks. Not that one, that's not what I'm going to show. So I'm going to show this sort of thing of how we digitize that. And I quick did a Google embossed puff letters just to get this image. So you see there's people who sell them too, so you can always check them out. But let's look at how we can digitize these. So embossed letter. So I did this one, but let's start from scratch. Actually, I'll go start from scratch so I can't cheat. All right, so let's say I want the letter S. I'm going to change that to the Bafo font just because I like it. I'm going to center it. And I'm going to make that 3 inches. I'm going to convert that. So I created lettering, typed, centered. I'm going to right click, go to operations, convert to vector. So I'm just using that as art. Okay. So if I want that to be my outer stitch on the outside of it, my puff has to go inside of it. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy and paste it. Copy, paste. Object, offset outline, -10. All right, and let me give that another color so you can see it. All right, and then so that's where the puff is going to be sewn. I also need to hold the puff down. So again, I'm going to copy and paste this. Copy, Control C, Control V. I'm just changing the color so we can see it. Object, offset outline, -20. All right, so I got 3 things here. All right. So let's digitize it. So I'm going to take this first one. I'm going to hold my shift key down and click on walk stitch. That creates me a walk in the shape of that outer one. Normal, it's a normal stitch. So just a running stitch with a stitch length of 20. So if I turn that off, you can see that's all it is. It's just an S. So how you would do this is I'm going to hoop, cut heavy, and I mean heavy cutaway. It's got to be cut away because the only way this works is you have something solid on the back, and you put the puff on and allow the shirt to stretch over top of the puff. Okay, so you need something that's not going to stretch. So, my favorite thing to use is the 3.1 ounce. I usually use 2 layers of that cutaway. So you hoop just cutaway, sew this. Cool. Now you're going to grab your puff and lay it down. So now we need to hold it down and then, we're going to hold it down with this shape and then cut it out with that shape. All right, so what does that mean for us? So I'm going to take this one, and again, instead of shift click, I'm going to show you different, I'm going to click on this one and say I want that to be a walk normal, and I want to add it. And this is just to hold it down, so I don't really need 20 points. Why don't we do like 35? Okay, and I want it to start and stop up here. Okay, so that's just to hold the puff down. Now I'm going to take this guy here, and again, this time I'm doing shift click, and we're going to change that to be a 9-point run. Okay, so see, that's a ton of little needle penetrations along here. So that's, going to cut out the puff for you, all right, with needle penetrations. And that needs to be the same color, and I want the start and stop to be up near this guy. So let's update our trims. Notice there's no trim between there. Cool. All right, so far, what do we get? I've got a placement on cutaway. I lay my puff down and I sew this color. I stop the machine, I rip the puff off. I take my garment, lay it on top. And then I'm going to copy this stitch, paste it after, and now it's going to sew down the S over top of the puff, pushing that fabric down to the cutaway, leaving that little bump. All right, so I want to do this last stitch as a bean stitch. And there's a letter designed as in this style here. Okay, what if you want a satin stitch around similar to that? Well, that's cool. You can, instead of doing a bean stitch for this last one, I can do control click, make that a satin stitch, and why don't we push that out to be a left? I think left, yeah, there we go. That way it won't sew on the puff, it'll still be outside. So now it's going to leave a satin stitch around where I can make that an accent color, and then this inside area will be just the material puffed up because there's puff underneath it. Okay, does that help? And you can do that with, any design you want. But that's the general idea of how you would do these sorts of things. When putting your material down, use a spray adhesive or something like that to lay it down. That would be my suggestion, so that it's nice and secure over top the puff before you start sewing the border down. Okay. All right, so that's how I would do it. So again, what was that? That was a walk stitch on cutaway. This stuff sews the puff down. I have an applique stop on my machine, so I can either cut away or remove the puff. Remember, it doesn't really matter what that edge looks like. It just needs to be close enough so that when it does this outer layer, it's sewn inside of it. So if it's rough looking, it's a who cares, because it's going to be covered with fabric. And then whatever you want for the outside, that's going to be on top of your garment. Okay, so that's a fun little project. All right, what else? Show tips for color palettes. So color palettes are interesting. So here is the default color palette. I'll load a color palette. So standard colors. Okay, apply. Notice it changed. So I keep these colors down here are ones I use a lot. So I just created this little palette so that at any time I want to use one of those, I know that's going to be the 1842. I know that's going to be 1595. That's 1799. Those are the colors I have on a lot of my equipment. So you can, for different projects or for different customers, create your own palette. So how do you create them? So let's say I right click on this, and what's another color I use a lot of? 1971. All right, so 1971, I can apply that there, and then the other one is the egg yolk 1624, I think. Yeah, egg yolk 1624. All right. So you can change any of these bubbles to be what you want. Right click on them and then say save as custom. And hopefully I overwrite this. Yes. So I want to overwrite it. So now, next time I create a project, so watch, if I create a new project, it goes back to the original. I can right click, I can say load custom palette, and now that palette I just created will load. All right. So it's, if you have a client that has very specific branding requirements that you use, 2 colors of isocord thread because that's the color you need, but the rest of them are Madeira, you can create your own little custom palette here that you know where they are, and that way as you're digitizing for that particular client, you don't have to go search for the colors. You can just click that's, you know, Madeira 1799. This one up here is something else. So you can create them to suit your needs and just load them as you need, as you see fit. So if I want the default one back, I can say, okay, load that one, and it goes back to default. Okay, so you can create, you know, whatever ones you want, and just they save out there. You can load them. You know, I've seen some really big projects that are, you embroider. A friend of mine loves to do them. So she does, like, there's 12 panels that you basically embroider a ton on each panel, and then you sew them together like a quilt, and it makes this beautiful, essentially solely embroidered quilt, which is awesome. And they usually have 500 colors. I'm exaggerating clearly, but that would be a good opportunity to say, all right, I have a palette of the colors it uses, so I don't have to keep on searching for it, because a lot of those are really good that you want to auto match. So that was actually another color thing that came up was, all right, how do you auto match thread colors when sending it to OS? Okay, so when you do the design work, over here, you can set the exact colors you want. So let's say I want that one to be this color, this one to be that color, and this one to be black. I don't know. Just for argument's sake, let's say those are the colors I want this to sew in. Okay, so as long as these colors, so 1925, 1950, and 1800, are up on the machine, that's one, I can tell it to color match those colors, but if I don't actually thread them, good luck. So in the OS side, you've got to go Tools, Settings, and then under that big box, click on the Settings tab, and then right here, you got to turn this guy on. So you can auto-define by default, that's one option, or if you don't use this, that's okay too. I'll be honest, I don't use that because there's only a handful of designs I like to auto-match. So I leave this off and do it this way. So this is where you go where you go to set up your colors. So when you double click to set up your colors, first off, you've got to color in this tree right here by right clicking on these bubbles to color them in to however you have your machine threaded. So if you're only using those 3 colors, the 1850, 1924, whatever I said before, and those are on needles 1, 2, and 3, I only have to color those for this to work. Then what you'll do is down here, I can click that and drag it down to say active colors, and it will show you how many actual spools of thread are used in the design. And then I can hit apply, or I can say auto match, only exact match. If you turn off exact match, it will pick whatever thinks is the closest color. Sometimes it picks right, sometimes it doesn't. You got to go adjust it. But when you have designs that have, 50 color changes, which, goodness, I think the biggest one I did was 164. Auto color match saves you because trying to color that by hand is tedious. So just auto match and be done with it. It will fill in all the color stops, and you're done. So exact match, if you color the tree in with whatever matching the threads, as long as it is in the OFM when you create it, this works fantastic. Okay, so that's another reason you might want to use palettes, or at least color it correctly in the OS. Okay. If you turn this guy on right here, every time you load the design, it will automatically auto match it. So you know, if you always have your OFM colored correctly and your thread tree is always colored correctly, that might be a option for you. Okay. Mixing embroidery with Dye Sub. Fun projects to share. So my favorite thing to do, or favorite project, if you will, is to embroider something on black, so using white thread, and then take wild prints, meaning like, I don't know, splatter rainbow or a cheetah print or, you know, something like that. And you print that on the paper, oversized to what you embroider. So if I embroidered mom across something in white thread on a black garment, I could then take my paper, lay it on top of the thread, heat press it, and now I've got mom in cheetah print or mom in rainbow print, you know, whatever. So, or, you know, whatever you want. So I love doing that. It's really fun. It looks cool. You can always, I do a lot of sublimation of designs and then embroidering around them so that it looks, so you're mixing medias, if you will. But my favorite thing to do is embroider in white and then sub crazy stuff on it, because people wonder how that's done with thread, and you're like, magic. Well, the magic is sublimation. So that works if you use polyester thread. So keep that in mind. Sublimation is a polyester dye. So embroider with white polyneon thread and you are good to go. Technically you can use other colors, but white is best. So I think that is by far my favorite thing to do. I did a hat once where I did a script across the hat and then put it in a hat press with the paper on it, pushing on my head like that's a hat. But so and created a really unique looking hat design that no one could figure out how it was done with thread. Well, it was not done with thread. So that was fun. Best practice for underlay stitches. Okay, so that's kind of loaded because there's a lot going on there. Your underlay might affect what densities you use. So depending on what density you use, you're going to use different underlays. Overall, zigzags I would never use for any performance-based fabric or any material that moves a lot, because it's going to pull on it more than if you did an edge walk. So overall, the auto underlay works really well if you haven't used it. So what that is, so if I right click on, go to properties, go to underlay. So down here under styles, if you're unaware of those, there is, yeah, right there. Sorry, I add other ones. So there's a lightweight and a heavyweight in it. So if you're unsure, you can apply those, and that will apply different underlays and pull compensation and things appropriate for lightweight knits, densities, all of that. So if I go into the properties, I can go look at what that did on all these things. Okay, so under those here, you'll see there is an auto underlay. For small elements, it does an edge walk. When it gets a little bit bigger, it's a zigzag only. Then it goes to a double zigzag, and then it goes to a fill, a crosshatched fill, things like that. So you can always use these guys, lightweight knits or heavyweight knits, and it will change the properties, both the densities and your underlays for those type of fabrics. And then why I'm kind of hesitant here is it really depends on what you like and what I like. So I tend to overdo the top stitching. Others have told me. So it has too many stitches on top, but that's a look I like. So I have a little bit less on the underlay because I'm overdoing it on the top stitching. I don't want, 10,000 stitches for something that only needs to be 5,000. So it's really going to vary on what you do for your different designs. If you're unsure, you can always just use right here, auto underlay. It works really well. So these are the auto underlay settings for normal materials. Just a general good starting point. And quite frankly, I use this pretty exclusively just like this because it works so well. So I just use it because it's nice. The top stitching, again, you can use auto density. I don't tend to do that a lot. I like to set my numbers, but then like I said before, that's a personal preference. I like to overdo the density up top. But I could just change the auto density by clicking on here and making it suit what I prefer in these numbers. So I could do that and then just use auto. I don't, but that's just, again, creature habit here. So that would be my suggestion, is to use the auto. Edge, so the bigger one to pay attention to is when you get to performance wear or lightweight fabrics, you really need to keep the densities and the stitch counts lower. So not doing zigzags, it pulls too much, using edge walks, decreasing your densities somewhat so that you don't have, or increasing so you don't have as many stitches, things like that. I have DesignShop 10. Are there any fonts to use for puff? No, you have to digitize them yourself. Can fonts be purchased separately? You know, a while back, Melco was selling a font pack that included some puff designs, puff fonts. I don't believe they sell that anymore. I think it was incorporated into the V11 or the V12 software. I think 11 or 12 and 12. I don't remember. But those fonts were incorporated, so they came down, and they are now included with the new levels of the software. So there are, in 11 and 12, there are puff fonts built into it. Short of that, we do have some resources online of how to digitize for puff. It's really just a matter of paying attention to all the edges to make sure you have needle penetrations all the way around, whether you do that by pinching it or by adding a column underneath. So that there's a Q&A plus a bunch of videos that show how to digitize specifically for puff. But yeah, in V10, I don't believe there's any fonts that work straight out for puff. You'd either have to, find fonts online that have already been digitized as puff fonts, or digitize them yourself. So, all right. So any other questions before we call it a day? So we got you a link for that. So those were the questions I had ahead of time. And I think I got all those. All right, so I'm going to scroll back through the chat just to make sure I didn't miss anything. Nope, cool. All right, I'll hang on for a sec in case there's any other questions. But again, a reminder, we got next week's, and then I'll be off for 3 weeks and be back the 4th week. So next week will be the last one, and then we'll have additional resources at the end of June. How do you save a stitch you make yourself? Any recommendation on embroidering on crew socks? Thread, stitch says. Okay. Sock embroidery. What I would suggest for that is to use the pocket clamps. So they go on the hat hoop. And if you haven't seen them, check them out. They're pretty cool. So it's a slightly rounded hoop that kind of clamps down as a frame around it. And it will allow you to get the sock over the arm without stretching it out to death in a circle. Okay, so that hoop works really well. I will say from experience, all right, whenever I do them, I take painter's tape and cover up the front of the bobbin, because I had a sock get shut. It was my own fault. I shoved it into the bobbin area and it got sucked up into the hook, which made for a very cranky afternoon of me cleaning that up and retiming everything. And I don't suggest that. So the pocket clamps are fantastic for doing socks in general, because it clamps it. You put it on the hat hoop and it kind of rotates around there. We did get you a link for those, so check those out. As far as digitizing, I would do the exact same way you do for beanies. So I prefer to use a primer stitch. So let's say I'm going to sew my initials on there. How big is that? 3 is too big. So say I'm going to do a 2-inch wide initials. Yeah, it's still too big, but all right. Whatever. There we go. So let's pretend that's the design I want. So I would then go create a primer stitch. That's the offset. And I would sew this the color of the sock. So if the sock is white, I would sew that white. It holds it all still. and then now I can put this on there, you know, without worrying about the knit moving around or things like that. So, you know, that's how I would suggest doing them, is similar to whatever you would do for a beanie. Works pretty well on those stretchy type knits. Okay. And that also gives you some thread base so that when the sock is stretching, it's not tearing apart the stitches of your top stitching. Okay, but the pocket clamp is really helpful for that. Just tape over the bobbin, or be cognizant that you're not shoving the sock into the bobbin area, because it makes for a bad day. What was the other one that was up there? How do you save a stitch you make yourself? So are you talking about like a decorative stitch? So let me go open my horsey. Yeah, okay, so decoratives. Where's my horse? Okay, this is a design I made myself, right? So you draw whatever shape, whatever design you want, whether it's a tiny little thing that's going to be repeated, or a full design like this, whatever. You draw it out, making sure your starts and your stop are on the same line. So if I take this guy, move it up, just so you guys can see it, my start and my stop are on that red line. Okay, that's important with decoratives. Otherwise, you end up with weird shifts. Then you select it, right click, save custom shape, tell it to be a decorative. I usually save as test, and it will say file exists. Yes, until I'm happy with it. So let's say I got to change a start or stop, or I want to tweak the design so it does something different. I hate putting a whole bunch of junk in my file. So here I can go, all right, decorative, test. Where is test? QRST, test. And now, oops. Test, there we go. So I can check it out and see if it actually did what I wanted it to do. Okay, so if not, I could go tweak it, change the stitches, whatever, resave it. Once I'm happy with it, again, I select the design, save custom shape, decorative, type in horse, which already exists, so or whatever you want it to be called. So you can see under the decoratives, well, let me go pull up here where you can see them a little bit better. So decorative stitches, these are all decoratives, and for instance, like that's one I did, that fan, and then there's my horsey. There were some other crazy ones. I might not have put them in here. Oh, that's the one I did last week or the week before. Test. Yeah, but anyway, you can create all kinds. Yeah, I didn't put them all. I haven't moved them all over, because I had a pretty cool little Celtic swirl. Anyway, so you can create any ones you want. So, and it's just save it. If you want to, oh, stop that. We don't need that. That's nice. There we go. What's another one? Oh, look at that. That changed that decorative over to bead. That does not work at all. All right. The other thing you can do is right click, save custom shape. If you want to save it as an actual design, you can save it in designs, tell it what category to put it in. You know, those sorts of things. If you want to save it as a custom shape, which are intended to be vectors, designs, things like that. Decoratives are by far my favorite, but you know, there you go. All right, so Sherry, does that help? And Alex, did that help on the crew socks? All right, any other questions? Awesome. Okay, I'm glad that was helpful. All right, so I will be back next week, and let us know what you want to learn about. Try to get that incorporated. Just remember, whenever you see my little this thing posted, that's where I get the questions ahead of time. So if you type them in, I can make examples beforehand. That way, it's rather than you watching me draw ugly things, I can have something better than ugly to look at. Anyhow, you guys have a fantastic weekend. I will be back next week, and then we'll be off for 3 weeks and back again late June. So next week, and then we'll have a short break. All right, everyone. Have a fantastic weekend. I will talk to you next time. Bye, everyone.